Welcome to Veteran State of Mind. I'm your host, Geraint Jones. Guys, I want to say thank you. I want to say thank you to you guys because of this podcast. Today, I got to have a conversation with an author who has been, I think fair to say, my favourite author of the last 22 years. It was absolutely insane to get to have this conversation. Steve served himself in the United States Marine Corps, so he is a veteran and he has a hell of a lot of job titles. He's just a really good bloke in general because there's a lot of people out there who, the better they get at something, the more knowledge they get. So there's some people have a tendency to hold that to themselves. It's like they don't want to share the quote unquote secrets to success. But this man is he's one of the most forthcoming with his information and trying to help everyone else get to where he was. And I had some conversations with him on social media in the past. After Brothers in Arms came out, I was really thinking, like, what the hell do I do next? Have I just, is writing over for me now? Because how am I ever going to do anything that kind of compares to writing against my Brothers in Arms? And he was, this guy didn't owe me anything, and yet he gave me the time of day. He helped me out a lot through that, which I was massively appreciative about. And then he agreed to come on the podcast. And I'm still kind of, and we recorded it over a week ago. We're just doing the introduction now for it next week. And I'm still kind of in shock that I got to have this conversation. And like I said, it wouldn't happen without you guys. I'm incredibly thankful to him too. And it's a fantastic position to be in with this community where we look out for each other in the veteran community. We're looking out for each other. We're putting out what we know to help others along, and I think that's awesome. So thank you so much, guys. And I'm just going to read you briefly the short biography, and I say short biography of this guest because to go through all of his accomplishments would take a hell of a long time, and we want to get straight into this podcast. So here we go. Stephen Pressfield is a best-selling historical novelist whose books include the classic Gates of Fire, Alexander, The Virtues of War, The Afghan Campaign, and Killing Rommel. That's what Amazon have got to say about him. He's also written all kinds of other books, most notably, I'd say, The War of Art, Break Through Your Blocks and Win Your Inner Creative Battles. I recommend everyone goes out and get The War of Art because even if you're not working on an art project per se, it's very relevant to just getting anything done in your life, basically. And as far as the historical fiction books go, which is like how I got to know about Stephen, my favorite is The Afghan Campaign. I'm going to put links to all these Amazon books up on the website. So if you go to vsonpodcast.com/books, I'll put all of Stephen's books on there with links to them. So if you click any of them, it'll just take you through to his Amazon page and you can pick them up on there. Please do go and support them because obviously he's given up his time to be on the podcast and we are a community. So it's good to give him something of ours back. Anyway, without further ado, let's get into the podcast. Here he is, the man, the legend, Mr. Stephen Pressfield. Well, Steve, welcome to the podcast, mate. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Jez. Thanks for having me.
One of the things I want to say before we get into this, because I appreciate you coming on this podcast, but also I want to say I appreciate how much work you do in general in sharing your knowledge, your knowledge of writing, your knowledge of art, your knowledge of history, because you've been on a lot of podcasts. You're one of the easiest guests there's ever been to look into because your stuff is everywhere. You put out your knowledge, and I really appreciate that about you. So thank you. Thank you for doing that.
I might kick it right back to you, Jess. I thank you for putting out your experience, PTSD, all the struggles coming home, and everything about your squaddies and everything. Not to mention your historical stuff. So my hat's off to you too.
Well,
God bless you.
Cheers, Steve. Thanks for that. And what's funny is like so much of that PTSD stuff occurred like just down the road from you. I used to rent an apartment next to Duke's, as in Duke's Malibu.
Is that right?
Huh. Yeah. So that's where a lot of the stuff went downhill, so to speak.
No, that's a great place to go downhill.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. If you're gonna pick a place to hit rock bottom, then have it be Malibu.
Yeah.
In California. Steve, you've written all kinds of books, and I want to go into a bit about why that is in a little while. But first of all, I'm going to be very selfish and dive into one of my favorite books. And I'm talking favorite books of all, not just from yourself. And that is, well, first of all, I'll say you're well known for the Gates of Fire, that kind of really put you on the map, so to speak. My personal favorite book of yours is the Afghan campaign. I read it before Afghanistan. I read it after. I read it last week. I love it. One of my favorite books. Why the Afghan campaign, and why? Or do you want to just tell people a bit about why you picked it and why that era in history in particular?
Well, the Afghan campaign is actually about Alexander the Great's Afghan campaign, not our contemporary one. And I was writing a book before that called The Virtues of War that was about kind of Alexander's full, scope of his life. And when I got to the part about him in the Afghan kingdoms, I said to myself, this is a book all by itself, because it was so different from the rest of his, and also because it was so much like the campaign that Americans and Brits and other Western, coalition forces were doing over there. And this because we've actually talked about this on Instagram. What struck me was the tribal nature of the enemy there. That was quite different from both other conventional campaigns that Western forces have fought, World War II, World War I, the whole thing, and also the other campaigns that Alexander fought against, the Persian Empire and so on and so forth, where there'd be actual battles, with one army lining up on one side of the field and the other clashing together, as opposed to Afghanistan, that was just completely different. So I just thought this is worthy of a book, and I'm sure it's like you when you write your historical stuff, you feel like you'd like to travel back there just to see what it's like, and the only way you can do that is in your imagination. So maybe I'm putting words in your mouth, Jez, but
no,
that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do it.
Well, and what you also did, and it's the first time I think I've ever seen this done, and I definitely stole it from, I definitely got inspired by this / stole the idea, was telling it from the grunt's point of view. Because I've loved historical fiction since I was, since I was a kid, but it's never really been from the grunt point of view. Why did you decide to do it that way rather than from the the military kind of hierarchy, the top of the hierarchy?
I'm not even sure I know the answer to that. It just sort of seemed very natural that was the way the story ought to be told. Mm-hmm. Because, as you know from being there, that's kind of really what it's about. I mean, to tell it from the general's point of view wouldn't give you any of a flavor of what the real world. It's a grunt's war, right? It's at the village level. It's at the foot sloggers level. And also I thought it would be fun to tell it that way.
Yeah, and you mentioned the tribal system, and almost this, because one of your books, The Warrior Ethos, you talk about the difference between kind of like tribal honor and the warrior's honor. And this is something that the guys in the book, they come up against, and it's very frustrating to them that the enemy doesn't work by the same moral code that they do. And of course we see that now. How is it that area of the world, you think, has that they've continued to have that tribal system, as opposed to what we would kind of define in the West as, the honor that our military fights with?
I mean, that's another great question. Let me ask you, Jez, for being there, would you say that if you could beam yourself back 2,300 years, that the guys you were fighting were pretty much the same were pretty much the same dudes that were back?
Oh, yeah.
Did you have that feeling?
Absolutely. And the same in Iraq, because who could be your friend one day, and this is something I know you talked about before, who could be your friend one day if their tribal sheikh decides. So I tell you what the great example is, would be the Sunni awakening in Anbar province.
Yeah.
You had they're 1 minute they're on Al Qaeda side, and the next it's like, hey, you know what? Let's go on with the Americans. They're offering us a better deal. Boom! Overnight they switch like that, which is something that in the West it's very hard for us to get our heads around that. But this whole concept of having, like Alexander had, of your today's enemy could be tomorrow's friend. That's something that we've really lost sight of, I think, with in the Western way of looking at war.
Right. Because certainly over there, that's the most natural thing in the world, right? Because you have but the question of why it has kind of maintained itself over
Mm.
2,500 years, or it probably goes back 10,000 years before that, you would think that modernity would somehow make inroads in there, but it just absolutely hasn't. I guess I don't really know what the answer is unless living the tribal life provides certain emotional, psychological, and spiritual benefits that the modern world can't compete with. That is the only thing I can think.
And I guess, what do you modernize? Like, because like you said, the modernity, it just hasn't met that place. Like, for all intents and purposes, life there is very much as it was thousands of years ago. And they seem quite happy with that. And what really struck me is, so one of our positions was an old Russian position. And we occupied this old Russian position. And some of the locals just thought we were Russians. Because they're so used to continuous war.
Yeah. Yeah, continuous invaders that have blue eyes. Yeah,
There's continuous war, and if there's no one invading, then they'll fight amongst themselves. But there's a reason that their compound walls are 2 meters thick, because they're constantly fighting. That is their kind of life out there. It's very hard for us to understand. But I did find the thing about one of the things in the warrior ethos was saying is that a warrior, you respect your enemy, you love your enemy, and I think in a way. And I think that this is something that we've overlooked time and again through history. One of the reasons I wrote about Varus and what happened to his missing legions was because I thought, well, this smells a lot like Iraq, which I'm going through at the moment.
Yeah,
we seem to underestimate our enemies now. We don't seem to have that respect for them. We seem to hate them. Do you think you can beat an enemy unless you respect them?
I don't think you can. In the long haul, I mean, it is two completely different ways of looking at things. I mean, I think actually, if we've lost respect for the enemy, I think it's because of having to fight tribal enemies where their point of view is that total us versus them thing, where there's the tribe and then there's everything else outside the tribe. And everything else outside the tribe is not really a human being, unless they're under the code of hospitality, right? Unless you sort of wander in and you're helpless and they take you in. But so I think that our guys having to come up against that have to sort of sink to that level, or the temptation is to sink to that level. I mean, let me ask you, as somebody who really did it, did you kind of feel the temptation to, discard certain self-restraint codes?
Yeah, I mean, on one side of it, you need to dehumanize the enemy to a degree or you'll never be able to kill him. Mm-hmm. So there has to be that. But then there's the other side of it. Like, to put it bluntly, we saw some pretty interesting things happen to animals when we were over there. And when that happens, it's very hard to have any respect for that culture. So, because when you've seen that, and like just little things like, we occupy a compound and they've just been using a floor to just shit all over the floor. Like, so when you're seeing that, it goes another level of dehumanization again. But now with some time, once you're out of it, you're looking at their tactics. They beat us. Plain and simple, they beat us. Now you don't beat somebody unless you're better at them in certain qualities. I admire like a lot about them. I think it's. I grew up reading a lot of historical fiction, a lot of war memoirs, state-on-state wars. So you build a certain perception about what it means to be at war. But just because we're keeping count on this scoreboard doesn't mean that they're working by the same scoreboard or the same set. Yeah. We're not even playing the same sport a lot of the time,
Yeah.
So really? Now I have a lot more respect for them than I did. Do I like them? No, but I hold nothing against anyone that's ever tried to kill me. I have nothing against that person. It's big boy rules. We both turned up looking for adventure, probably. So I have nothing against that. But the person that's chopping the head off of somebody because he sold us some cigarettes, then obviously that's when it starts to get murky waters.
Let me ask you a question, Jez. I was reading about how you felt like this is about your writing career.
Okay.
And how you felt like your true calling was to be a soldier, and that going into a writing career was kind of a second best scenario. Have you changed your mind about that at all?
Yes, to a degree. I'm starting to think now that yes, Colin, you know what the character Stephanos in the Afghan campaign. I've read enough books by now to kind of recognize that every army carries with them somebody that wants to tell the tale about what was going on that campaign. And you and I would not have the resources that we have to work from unless somebody had thought this is worth telling the story about. And that's kind of how I see it now. Instead of seeing it as I was born to be a soldier, now I'm a writer, it's I was born to be a soldier who writes. I think that's kind of how I put it together now, which is incredible. It doesn't need to be necessarily that I'm there to write about my own experiences, but to write about soldiers' experiences. I mean, how about yourself? Because, you were a Marine yourself, and one of the things I wanted to ask you is about the character of soldiers. Does it change over time? And do we, is it an obligation to pass on your experiences so that future generations can benefit from reading about it?
I do think, I'm actually, I would like to interview you for something I'm doing at some point. We got to talk about this.
Fantastic. I'm in.
But I'm working on a kind of a putting together a little video series now that I'm calling the Warrior Archetype. And what that is going back to to Jung's idea of the collective unconscious and of the archetypes of the unconscious. And one of those archetypes, for sure, there's the king, the lover, the sage, the mystic, the divine child, blah, blah, blah. But one of them is the warrior. And it does seem that that's kind of something that kicks in, at least for men, at a certain stage in life where you want to, join the football team and you want to drive fast, you want to blow things up, you want to hang out with your buddies and that kind of stuff. And that, I think, is timeless. And I think that when, it must come from, I assume, the evolution over, millions of years or tens of hundreds of thousands of years from the tribal hunting band and on and on and on. So, yeah, I do think that warriors don't change very much from certainly the guys you were fighting in Afghanistan. They don't change. They were the same guys, they were 2,500 years ago. And I would bet that if you took your buddies and beamed them back into Alexander's phalanx, that, you'd fit in a flash, as soon as you mastered the use of some of the weapons.
Yeah. No, I agree. Like, you've said it yourself, it's not a normal thing to go and volunteer to be in the military, particularly in the infantry. We have a very safe life where we don't ever have to put ourselves in these positions. We don't ever need to be crapping into a bag and sleeping on the floor, but we look for it. Or a certain tiny percentage of us does. But I think you're right. It makes total sense that is something that would evolve over time, that it'd be something that's almost in our genetic imprint, that some people... Because I have two brothers, neither of them have ever wanted to touch the military with the barge pole, which is a very sensible way of looking at life. And I've had exactly the same upbringing, but I had to go, and almost everyone all my friends were in it. We had to be there, which is the same as I know with the writing. Is like your list of things is like number 8 and 9 on the list. It's basically like if you want to be an artist, if you want to make art, it should be the reason behind that should be. You have to make it, and it's the same with soldiering. If I feel very sorry sometimes. I'm sure there's some listening now. There's young guys listening, young girls listening who want to join the military who can't because of some medical condition. That must be so hard for somebody to go through that when your core being is telling you that you have to be this thing, and you can't because of. You can't because of a medical condition. That must be incredibly hard for people on their spirit. I know you call it the daemon, right?
Yeah. Let me ask you, Jez, what was the call for you? Was there a moment, or you just felt it since you were a little kid, or what was it?
For war, I'll tell you about for war, it's just always been there. I've just always been obsessed with war. You know, those like the toy soldiers. The whole floor would be taken over with me recreating battles with toy soldiers. I'd be in the woods all the time. I've just always been obsessed with it. Everything I'd read. If I look through my books now, I'm like, wow, I really need to diversify what I read because it's all about stabbing people or shooting people. But there's not much in between. And then for writing, it's the same thing. Apparently, I used to my mum takes, if I ever have a girlfriend on those rare occasions, my mum takes pleasure in telling them about the amount of time I'd spend sitting on the potty reading books as a kid and reading stories. And actually, when I was in school, the teachers told me to stop writing war stories because I'd turn every assignment into a war story. So it's always been there for me.
Do you believe in previous lives?
I do. That's one of my questions for you, Steve. You've been looking at my bloody questions.
Oh.
No, I'm more than open to the idea, put it that way. But I used to be like every young man. I used to be skeptical of everything. So if I couldn't see that something made total sense to me and I could explain it, then it was a stupid idea, Then I've started to think more about where do ideas come from. I had it a while ago. Sometimes you'll wake up with a fully formed idea or a full skeleton, should I say.
Yes.
You've still got to put the meat on there, but you can see all the bones and you can see what it is. Where does that come from?
Yes, that's the question. Yeah. Every artist, every writer asks over and over, where does it come from? Yeah.
And we got my mum's, like the DNA ancestry results. We got that for a birthday, and it came back. I think I ended up being about 10% Italian or something. And with me writing the Roman books, all of a sudden I was like, wait, could this be it? The 10% Italian in there, could this be it? But I feel like there's almost this. I don't know if it's possible to destroy energy and if it's possible to destroy emotions and feelings just because we're not capable right now of deciphering where they are or where they've gone. I think that they're still around, and I think some people pick them up better than others. Like maybe some people are born with the genetics to play in the NFL. Maybe some people are born with the genetics to pick up ideas out of the ether, of the soup, as we call it. What do you think? I'd love to hear what you think about this.
Yeah, actually, I like what you said about you don't think energy can be destroyed. I've never thought of it that way, but that may be a part of it in some crazy. I mean, I have no real idea about it, but myself, I find that I was drawn to the ancient Greek world, but not really to the Roman world. Mm-hmm. And the stuff I wanted to read was, Herodotus or Thucydides or something, and I was not drawn to Livy or anything. I tried to, and I couldn't get into it. So it does make you wonder, since they're basically the same thing, are very, very close cousins, what's the difference, And at the same time, the books that I've written about ancient Greece from Gates of Fire on, I think there were 5 altogether. I never planned them. I never planned one from the other, and I certainly never thought that I would feel so at home in reading the stuff. That to read, Plato or Thucydides or Xenophon or something that would feel like, I was in my own country instead of the contemporary world. So I don't know. I mean, it's sort of a romantic, crazy notion to think, oh, well, I lived back then, but maybe there's some explanation on the terms of multiple levels of the universe. I don't know, but there's something.
Our genetics in our physical makeup gets passed on from our ancestors. I really don't see that it's a leap to expect that our memories can too. I found a cat that I adopted on the road back in November. That cat is a straight up murderer. It is killing everything that moves in the garden. I've never taught it how to do that. Uh-huh. I haven't taught it how to clean itself or how to do anything. It knows how to do these things. Some people, I've seen soldiers who are there because it's a job, and I've seen soldiers who are there because they were born to soldier. And it's like watching the difference between if I try to do ballet and someone that was born to do ballet. There's just a difference in the slickness and the way that you take it to it. Doesn't mean that you don't complain, because you should. The only time a soldier's not going to complain is when he's dead. Simple as that. But I think that there's a lot to be said for the fact that there might be some kind of like genetic memory that gets passed on. The other side of it as well I find very interesting is, like, I'm sure maybe with you with the Greek stuff, is that maybe fits your idea of idealism of people with virtue, people putting others before themselves, and it fits what you like about the idea of the way that people should live with each other. But again, why do you think like that when you've been born in America in the 20th century? Why would you think like a Greek?
Yeah. Yeah, there's no real explanation that we can prove. I mean, I even feel like it's in my body, that I feel like, when they talk about the auric body or the energy body or something like that, that we don't have instruments. We can't put a screen up and shine it over us and see, but I sort of feel like there are parts of my body that feel like they can relate to that era in some way.
Absolutely. How do you feel when you go to those places? Have you, you've traveled a lot. When you're in somewhere where you know that there was this civilization, how do you feel when you're in that place?
It's interesting because certainly when I go to Greece, like if you go to, have you ever been to Thermopylae?
I haven't been to Thermopylae, no. No, I've been to Greece, but not Thermopylae.
It's one of the most disappointing places you can possibly go to because there's a freeway there. Now, and it's the other thing is that sedimentation has happened. It was a really stark wall down to the ocean, and sedimentation has built it out like a mile and a half into the Malian Gulf, and so the original battlefield is totally gone. It's buried under, 2,500 years of debris, and all that has been overgrown by scrub oak. So when I'm there, I'm sort of like, in my mind, I'm trying to kind of beam myself back, trying to see what was this like then, because it's changed so much. But there are certain places that are kind of unchanged. And there, I definitely do feel a resonance, and I really do feel like, not so much that I've been there before, but I'm kind of moved. I feel an emotion in some way that I don't necessarily feel in other places. I know I was watching a documentary. This is Alexander the Great's Battle of Issus, which I guess is in Turkey today. And I've studied that, over and over and kind of visualized it for the book I wrote about it. And today it's a chemical plant.
Okay.
And the plane there, is this smokestack spewing crap, so it's like to get there and try to visualize what was this like. It's really, whereas I mentioned Afghanistan, it's like, this is what it was. Nothing's changed.
Well, there was one part when I was out there, I remember this clearly. It was the first couple of days where we were moving from Camp Bastion, which is a big camp out in the desert, and we were moving to our patrol base, and we were going through this wadi, which is one of the only ways to get through. There's only one pass through this thing. And I was one of the first guys to go through, and it was hot and horrible and dusty as it usually is. But the sun was setting, and the sunsets in those places are just incredible. And we had this long strung out column. And I was looking back and I was thinking, wow, this is incredible. How many armies have passed through this? Because it's one of the only places you can pass through. So it's a very fair bet to say that Alexander the troops went through that same pass. And I'm looking down and I'm like, wow, the sun's setting, there's all this armor coming through. War is glorious. And then the engineers blew the IED up that was at the mouth of it. And I'm like, Jesus Christ, that was a bit big. And then all of a sudden, you realize that it's not a game. But yeah, I'm definitely a bit of a romantic when it comes to those things. I don't really feel it so much as I've been to Rome a few times. There's so much going on there. It's hard for me to think that. But certainly in Afghanistan, you couldn't, because it is unchanged. It really is. It's probably as close to how we can look at life 3,000 years ago. As we can anywhere. One of the things as well.
Another area like that is Israel, where I was reading about the great General Moshe Dayan and how because Israel is such a small place, you can easily, and most young Israelis do this, hike all over the country, camp, and they go to places like there that are just like you were saying about that wadi. That is a place where David and Jonathan slew the Amorites, and it's a narrow canyon that you can go in and you can dig up arrowheads right from this spot, and so many young Israelis do that. And even they bring Americans over, and I'm sure Jews from all over the world, in the Project Birthright, right, where they'll bring them there and take them to these places. And it's a tremendous kind of, I don't know, I don't want to say brainwashing, but, in an inculcation of the people, of the culture, where you're right there where this stuff happened, and nothing's changed.
Well, I'm sure you were a Marine. They told you about what came before you, right? You don't just turn up and they say it's about carry on. My regiment was the Rorke's Drift Regiment, the Zulu, the famous battle against the Zulu.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, but you get taught about this, and every day. I mean, that was going on 200 years ago. Every year you have Rorke's Drift Day in the battalion. B Company is Rorke's Drift Company. That kind of history is really important. I want to go back to something in the Afghan campaign that I thought was really interesting. Is one of your characters, 'cause I know sometimes we speak through our characters, right? And one of your characters took issue with the use of the term "subdued the region" by a correspondent there. Do you have a bit of a bone to pick when it comes to the way that war reporting is done?
I didn't think I did, Jez, until I started writing that passage.
Yeah.
And, but yeah, I think, there's a big difference between my hats off the war correspondents, and in a way I consider myself kind of a war correspondent.
Absolutely.
Because I wasn't in combat in Afghanistan or Vietnam or anywhere, but yet I'm writing about it. So maybe I'm getting down on myself and saying to myself, where do you get the balls to tell it like it is, But I do think you must have felt this as a squattee yourself, that there's a huge difference between somebody, even a guy that's standing right next to you with, that's in as much danger as you are, but you're the one that's actually, you can't go home. You can't go back to the BBC in London.
To be honest, that's never bothered me, but like some of the ways that the disregard almost for civilian lives and things is what kind of gets to me. It's just like there's it's collateral damage. It's inevitable. No, it's not inevitable. It's only inevitable when you fight the war and when you fight it in a certain way. That's kind of what gets my goat about it, is that 60 people died in a market, it's like, and then it's boom, on to the next thing. I'm like, whoa, those 60 people, that's children. They had dreams. They had aspirations. They wanted a better life. That's what kind of gets me. We signed up for the war. I wanted to be there. The children and the people in the marketplace didn't. I don't like, because the thing is when I think if people could see the cost of war, then they wouldn't be so rah-rah about going to it the next time. When the stuff with Iran was heating up at the beginning of this year, and there was a lot of cheerleading from the sidelines, thinking it's not going to be the people in charge that die. It's going to be women, kids, and they died in a drone strike. People think that people are just, you vaporize like that. It's a nice end. There's no such thing as a nice death or a clean death. It's death is a horrible thing. We should do everything we can to avoid it. And I think sometimes we can be too. Look, if you were in Alexander's army and you were killing people, you were doing it at the end of a lance or with a knife. But now we can use drones from Vegas to kill people. It's become too. It's not a bad thing that it used to be in people's faces, because that makes you think twice about doing it.
Yes.
One of the things I wanted to talk about as well, in the Afghan campaign, a lot of Alexander's army was mercenary. And obviously, as you know yourself from the book, The Profession, which I couldn't get in the UK. I've got a copy on the way, but it sounds really interesting because are you of the mind that we are going back towards what used to be the norm and having large mercenary armies rather than standing state armies?
Well, I certainly think it's an interesting idea. I mean, I don't know I think probably, throughout history, there probably have been more mercenary armies or armies composed partly of mercenaries than what we might call national armies today. And certainly from, I have one character, Telamon, that's in my stories, who's a mercenary. And from his point of view, he thinks the people that fight under a flag are fools.
Yeah.
That
well, there's a lot of people
fighting
that think that now.
for free, and they're fighting for some ideal, unless you're defending your home turf, but fighting for some ideal that they're never going to get anything out of. But I do think that it certainly seems to be tending toward the mercenary, toward a contractor type thing these days, just because, have you ever read Demosthenes' Philippics?
No, I haven't.
Are you familiar with them at all, Jez?
No.
Well, it's really interesting stuff. This is like when Athens was sort of past its peak, and to the north of them, Philip of Macedonia, Alexander's father, was coming on strong and had really invented a whole new way of war, and was constantly sort of probing at Athens' northern empire and stuff. And what happened in Athens was people were so comfortable that they didn't want to send their sons off anymore to do this. So they would hire mercenaries to sort of hold Philip off. So these speeches were called Philippics because they were all about Philip. And basically what Demosthenes was saying over and over was, you guys better get your act together here because this is for real. You got to send your own sons up there because this guy Philip is going to come down here and kick our ass. And he did, But you that it was sort of a point in the history of Athens where they were on the downslide. The great heroic days were over. People just wanted to enjoy life, and it was simpler to hire mercenaries and send them out there. So I think we're on the downslide, Western civilization today, and it sort of makes sense. I mean, you could certainly make a case that the American army is a mercenary army already. It isn't really, but there's certainly elements to that. So yeah, I'd sort of, but also as a writer, and I'm sure you can relate to this, just the whole idea of like the profession is set about 20 years in the future in Iraq and Afghanistan, and they're all mercenary armies there. And it just was a fun idea to kind of explore what it was all, that they would be hired by corporations. Like they'd be working for ExxonMobil or something like that to secure a certain area. And, there's a lot of that going on already in Africa.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. And then, essentially Russia are hiring out their army. You got Russian units for hire, basically.
Yeah.
And what we've got in Iraq is, so one of the things that I read, and I don't know how true this is, but for the surge, they were seriously considering bringing in the draft back in America, but the alternative, because that would be political suicide, the alternative would be hiring more private contractors. And to go back to your man Telamon, it's like you're getting paid, let's call it £70 a day. Let's be generous in the army, or you can be £1,000 a day as a mercenary. That's why there was such a brain drain from the army, because any NCO or a guy that was near the end of his enlistment was like, fuck this. I can do the same job. I'll be treated more like an adult, and I'm going to get paid. I'll tell you this, Steve. I wasn't in Malibu because I was still in the army. I was on a contractor's wage at the time, which is the nice way of saying mercenary in our times. But why
Malibu? Was there a war going on in Malibu? What was it?
I wanted to get into writing, so I figured I don't want to go and hang around with the people who are on the ground level trying to break in around Hollywood. I'm going to go where people have already made it. So I'm going to go to Malibu and try my best to hobnob around there. And it worked. It worked to a certain degree. I found some people that were willing to look at my early work and give me feedback on it. But I try and put myself around people who are they've already done what I want to do, rather than them we're all sitting around talking. Because I've fallen into that trap too, where we sit around talking about what we're going to do, but we never actually do any of the work. So, it's I want to be around people that have been there and done it. Let me ask you a little bit, Jez, in your writing world. Who do you see as your audience? Who are you writing for? Particularly, in both, like in Brothers in Arms and in your historical stuff. Is it the same, or? There's a lot of overlap in it. I definitely believe in, my thing is, there's 7 billion people on the planet, or whatever it is now. If I write something that I enjoy writing, there's going to be enough other people who are going to enjoy the same thing. There's so many people out there that if I write what I enjoy, there's going to be other people that enjoy it. So I try not to think too much about and second guess. Like now, honestly, Steve, I used to have a thing where I was very much tied up into making the bestseller list and that kind of thing.
Uh-huh.
And then when Brothers in Arms just missed out on Sunday Times, and then I asked myself, I started to get messages from people to say that it had helped them through a dark time, and I was thinking, like, why was I so tied up in having this number on the bestseller list next to it? Purely out of ego, let's be honest. That was now, like, it doesn't, because you could have a book that's extremely well done at number 11, or a book that's just as well done at number 5. It doesn't make a difference in the quality of the work.
Or even number 511, yeah?
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm like, why am I doing this? It's out of ego. So now I'm like, I'm trying to write something that has a moral message in it. Something that has a moral message, something that maybe is just a light. So I'm about to self-publish, and this is some of my questions for you, because I was wondering about Black Irish. You backed yourself by, doing your Black Irish publications. I'm trying to pass on my experiences so that, one, people don't make the same mistakes as I do, because a lot of what I wrote about in Brothers in Arms was preventable if I'd have known any better. So that's one motivation. Another is to honor the memory of people who have gone before. That's an important one for me. And another is to just let people know that they're not alone. That, one of the things you mentioned, when you had resistance in your mind, you're thinking you're the only person that thinks like that. We all think we're the only person that thinks like that. So I'm here to tell people, no, mate, you're not the only person that thinks like that. We all have fucked up thoughts. We all think we're alone. We're all struggling. And if I can do that, and let's be honest, make a living from it at the same time, which is just, I'm sure you're still the same way. You have to pinch yourself. And you pinch yourself to, when you're like, well, this is actually my job.
Yeah, true.
So I'm sorry, that was a long way of going around. But basically, what it comes down to is I don't worry too much about who my audience is, because I used to think, this is for veterans, but I've had so many civilians who say they've benefited from Brothers in Arms now that I think it's for anyone who's going through some shit or wants to read about other people going through some shit, because we all go through some shit.
All right, that's a good answer. I like it. I sort of feel the same way, and I feel like I'm really writing for myself, because of what I love, or what I'm called to do, which varies, for me. As you know from reading my stuff, I'm a believer in the muse, and I believe that we're kind of, we're given assignments and we go forward, and one might be quite different from the other.
Yep.
But like you, I also get letters from people that say things like, you showed me that I'm not alone, that I thought I was out here on planet zero, and I do think that not just, I don't believe I'm in the business of passing on wisdom or that I know anything or anything like that. But I just think in terms of, this is the way you should live or whatever. But I do think you can, as a writer, you can articulate a feeling that you've had in a certain situation, or that you can imagine a character having, and that just expressing it, people will read that and go, holy shit, that's exactly how I felt, or that's, and like you say, it makes somebody that reads it, and I know that for me as a reader, feel less alone, and that's a huge thing, because we all can get off on our own little planets, and that's not so great.
And, you've also said, like we talked about, you should write what you have to write. So if you're looking at a project and going, I think this is the most commercially viable project,
right.
It's probably not what you should be writing. That's not the criteria you should be looking at for writing, right?
Exactly. That's how I feel. In fact, every time I have thought, I'm onto this is a surefire commercial thing, it's completely bombed, and by the same token, the projects that I thought were only interesting to me, nobody else is going to care about this with me, those are the ones that have found an audience. So I've kind of given up, like who's it, William Goldman said, nobody knows anything.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, one of the things, like, it was great because, I've been going through the books again before this, and one of your things in there was just finish it. Whatever the project is, just finish it. And then you can come back and ask those questions when you're done. And I really needed that kick in the ass because I talked myself out of I'd outlined it, loved the outline. I'd come up with the concept, loved the concept. I'd come up with the outline, loved the outline. I'd started writing, loved the characters. And then I'd somehow started doubting myself. I'd started asking questions. And one of the reasons, I'll be honest, is because I got bills to pay. So I'm like, because I ghostwrite. Ghostwriting pays some of the bills, and then, but that doesn't, and I'm very privileged to be able to do that, but that isn't, I don't feel that's the muse. So that's not grabbing me by the throat and saying, get out here and write.
Definitely. Yeah.
So that day, I believe in taking massive action. When you see something like that, there's no point in me going, oh, Steve's got a good point there, I'll come back to it next week. I was like, he's got a good point. Close the book, to the laptop, and I sat down, I did 8,000 words. Just straight off. I smashed it. And then I sent it I looked at myself and I was like, this is fucking good. But I built up that resistance. And then sometimes when you look at it, you don't even know where it came from, do you? Like, where did it even, well, you do know where it came from. So can you just explain to people what resistance is? Because I've said it a few times there, so people might be scratching their heads a bit. But once you explain it, everyone's going to recognize this feeling.
Okay, let's see if here in front of me is this keyboard. And if you're a writer and you sit down to the blank screen with a keyboard in front of you, you can feel radiating off that screen at you a negative force trying to keep you from doing your work, trying to keep you from getting in there and do it. It's like if you join up, get a gym membership, and what is that force that makes you sleep late, and never go there? You buy a exercise bike and you never use it, that kind of thing. So resistance is that negative force that's out there, and it's universal. Everybody experiences it. That when we try to move from a lower level to a higher level, resistance with a capital R, that's what I call it, my name for it, will kick in and will appear as a voice in our head saying things like you were just describing, Jez, saying things like, who do you think you are trying to attack this great project here? You don't even have an education, blah, 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 blah. You're too old, you're too young, you're too fat, you're too thin. Or the other side of resistance is it'll try to distract you, and it'll say, well, it's time to chase women. It's time to do drugs. It's time to go on vacation. It's time to go back to sleep. It's time to turn on Facebook and do all that sort of stuff. So it's just this negative force. I say in my book, The War of Art, basically, writing is easy. Sitting down to write is what's hard. If you can just make, or any art or any entrepreneurial, anything that's innovative and that requires you to take initiative and take a chance and put yourself out there. If you can just sit down and do the work, talent is bullshit. The muse will come to your rescue. So that's my definition of resistance. And you obviously, I think in the case you were just describing, Jez, what was really happening was you were really onto something. You had something that was hot, and it was going to take you to the next level as you did it. And so your own resistance, your own tendency to self-sabotage just ramped itself up and said, man, we better stop Jez from doing this because he's going to get good if he does this. So I always say that the more important a dream or a project is to you, to your evolution as an artist or as a human being, the more resistance you'll feel to it. So the bottom line of that is when you do feel a lot of resistance, and I say this to everybody that's listening, that's a good sign. It shows you that that's what you really need to do. The thing you're most afraid of, that you would rather do anything else except do that, that's the one you have to do.
And it's so sneaky too. Like you helped me through this, and I really appreciate it. It's like, so when Brothers in Arms came out, which is something I'd wanted to do for all my life, I just had this massive sense of, well, what's the point doing anything else now? Because what can ever compare to writing a story about my brothers in arms? And I literally thought I could never write anything again. And now that seems so stupid to me. But in your head, that sounds like a good argument, doesn't it? But it's not. but that's how resistance works. It can pretend to be your friend. It can make a lot of sense when you look at it.
Makes brilliant sense. Always diabolically great sense.
So I've started to look at it now. You have to look at it as an enemy, and you have to look at so you have to recognize that it is an enemy with, like you said, it's got a capital R. It's the enemy, and I think especially for veterans listening or people serving in the military, you know that the enemy is sneaky. You know that the enemy is going to hide IEDs in bins and in curbs and in dead bodies. And once you start thinking of resistance as an enemy, you start looking, because you're not just waiting to be attacked by resistance then. You're like, how is this fucker going to get to me today? It might be in my phone, so I'm going to turn my phone off before I go to bed. Bump. Resistance isn't going to get me that way. And you start to have counter-resistance drills, basically. One thing, so I've got two above my desk now. I found that what works well is to have a mirror. So you've got to look in that mirror before you start writing. And then I've got two notes on there. Three, sorry. One is Finish in the End, which is the book I'm working on at the moment. The other is Fuck Resistance. And the other one is I Am a Professional. And I have to read those out and look at myself in the mirror as I'm doing them, right? And it sounds
I've never heard that before. The mirror, I like that. That's great.
Well, I stole it from David Goggins. You know, this crazy guy that runs 500 miles every day. He has the thing called the accountability mirror. And I'm pretty vain, so it was a good transition for me. But once you look at it as an enemy and you turn it into a competition of you're not going to beat me, that I found is very helpful. How do you what systems do you have in place for overcoming resistance?
Pretty much the same that you have. One of the things like this video series that I told you I'm about to do called The Warrior Archetype is it's really just what you said, Jez, that if you think of resistance as a literal enemy, then you sort of have to put your mindset into that kind of warrior concept, and you have to think that, all of those virtues that you would use on a physical battlefield, you're now going to use on an internal battlefield. Patience, courage, the willing embracing of adversity, all of those things. So that's what I sort of do. I think for me, the kind of warrior concept blends with the professional concept too. Professional as opposed to an amateur. That an amateur will fade at the first, encounter with adversity, whereas a professional will not. So that's my way of doing it. And another great ally in this thing, and I'm sure you do this exactly the same way, is habit.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely.
To make sure that it's not, an amateur who wants to be a writer or an artist or a poet or a songwriter might work 2 or 3 days a week. They kind of wait for the mood to strike them, But a professional, if you're Michael Jordan, if you're Kobe Bryant, if you're anybody like that, you know that every single day, you just get up and you do it, whether you want to do it or not. And there'll be great days when everything is flowing and it's going to be wonderful. But there'll be other days when it's just a real drag and it's the last thing in the world you want to do. But the weird thing, and I'm sure you can relate to this too, Jez, sometimes on those days, those are the best days. When it's the last thing in the world you want to do, but you make yourself do it because you're a professional, and suddenly, good things happen.
Absolutely, those are the days that you're a professional. This morning, my grandma's freezer, my mum woke me up this morning, my grandma's freezer looked like it had gone, so she had a bit of a flood in the kitchen. So instead of I usually get up, make a cup of tea and start writing. That's usually the way that I do it. But I got to go out for a couple of hours to go and sort out this freezer. And then when I sat down to write, it was like pulling teeth. But when it got done, I felt good. I felt good. I'm going to have to go back over and rewrite it. I know I am. I know it's not great stuff, but it got done. and that is a win.
Great, good on you. I mean, I say as a fellow writer, the fact that you didn't let that unexpected hiccup throw you off your game. That's another part of being a pro. I'm sure that Kobe Bryant and Michael Jordan have had days when, with their kids or whatever, they just couldn't do whatever, they got knocked out of there. But I'm also sure that they did their thing that day, one way or another.
Absolutely. And Stephen, I want to relate this because, you and I both artists, we love what we do. There's a lot of people listening to the podcast who are probably thinking, well, how does this relate to me? I think, but resistance, that could be for somebody, let's say somebody transitioning from the military into civilian life and not finding it easy. That's resistance, right?
Yes. It's let me get into Jewish mysticism here for a second.
Okay.
There's a concept that life exists on two levels. There's the material plane that we're on right here. And then there's a higher plane above it, the soul plane, the neshama. And that the soul is trying to communicate to us constantly and to help us, whether it's, you call it your unconscious, your muse, whatever. And we on the bottom plane, we're trying to reach up towards that soul, which you could call prayer, or you could also call, from a writer's point of view, when we're trying to reach up, it's kind of like, give me an idea, help me, what's the next sentence, But the interesting thing is that according to Jewish mysticism, in between these two is another force, a negative force. And its job is to stop the neshama from reaching us and to stop us from reaching it. And they just, they don't teach you and me that in school. Nobody sits you down and says, there's this invisible force out there that's going to fuck you up every possible way it can. But as you and I know, it's true. It's real. It's more real than, anything in front of us. So that's our enemy every day. To the guy who's been, or gal who's just been discharged from the military and is trying to find a new place, there's those two levels and there's this thing in between. And that's, once you know that there's that thing in between, that there is an enemy, that it isn't all in your head, it isn't all just something that you're thinking, then at least you know what you're up against. And you can say, I've got to somehow break through this to whatever it is I'm meant to do.
So what you said in one of the books that the hardest thing to do is be ourselves, right? Is that why? Is that it? That layer? Is that what makes it so hard to be ourselves?
I guess that is. I haven't even thought about what makes it so hard to be ourselves, but it certainly, that seems to be our life quest. I mean, I know I'm a believer, as you know, for reading my stuff, that we're already born, like you and I were talking about previous lives. Mm-hmm. The minute we come into this world, we're already a personality. Just like you can see in children, 3 different siblings will be completely different from day one. Even like you were talking about your cat, cat or a dog or litter, right? They're all different and they never change, right? Their relationships, and they never change. So I'm a believer that we're born already as ourselves, with our own destiny, with our own calling, with our own genius. But our job is to find out who that is and to become it. And I guess it's resistance. I'm not sure what it is, but there does seem to be forces that are working against us, trying to keep us from finding who we really are. One of the things I wanted to ask you, Jez, is and I don't know if you can look ahead this far, but do you see yourself 15 or 20 years from now writing about stuff other than war or other than whatever you're writing about now? Can you see that far ahead? Do you think about that?
I do. So I've got I'm just about to self-publish a crime thriller. And one of the reasons I did it was because I was like, I don't want to write about war forever if I don't want to. And I don't want to be, and this is why I thank you for blazing a trail here, because you don't have one genre. You write what you want. And I love that. So when I took this book to publishers, they were like, oh, well, we like it, but can you make the guy ex-special forces? I'm like, no. That's not how it came. That's not how it came to me. It's essentially, I wanted to write about a guy who was, instead of all these surly, drunk, detectives you get. Because I always thought, like, if one of my loved ones died and some guy turned up with his tie loose, stinking of whiskey, I'd fucking beat the shit out of that guy, you know? So I wanted to make this a character who was, you know, this character who takes care of himself, who practices meditation, who practices yoga, you know, who loves life. And he wants to preserve life because he loves it, not because he's sullen and he hates the world. They're like, well, can you make him a special forces guy? No, I cannot make him a special forces guy. So I just decided to self-publish. Because you know, that felt like the right thing to write at the time. At the moment, I'm writing something that's quite dystopian. It felt like the right, well, now in 2020, it definitely feels like the right time. But when I started writing it last year, it felt like the right thing to do. So to answer your questions, one of the things I should mention as well is that we've got a few comedies in the works at the moment which are looking promising, and I hope to put those out there. And one of them has nothing to do with soldiers whatsoever. It's a comedy. Because I think you have some of the stuff I write is quite dark. I want to put lightness and light into the world too. So honestly, the 15, 20 years thing, you know, 10 years ago when I was in Malibu, I couldn't see myself living 10 years. So I don't really, now I hope I live to be 30,000, you know, but I'm just going to go with whatever feels, I'm not looking, you said this yourself, you know, it's, who saw this coming? Who saw 2020 coming?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of wasted energy in planning things out too far ahead. You know, I have my next few books planned out, but if I get an idea which trumps those, that's going to jump ahead in the order on the deck. Is that kind of the way you work? Or
yes.
Do you...
And I would say for what you're doing, that on the subject of being yourself, that sort of project by project, you're expanding your conception of who you are and what your talent is, you know, what your gift is. And I agree, we can't look too far ahead because the muse gives us different gifts that we could never predict. So I think that the process of getting to, if we already are who we were born, right? We already are a person. There are like many rooms in that mansion. And it's our job to kind of explore those rooms, you know, and not to be afraid to go into those rooms. And for the soldier, male or female, that's coming out of the service now and is looking, and it seems impossible, right? I don't want to be a milkman. I don't want to drive a garbage truck, you know. I can't see myself getting into Cambridge, you know. I think that's the wrong attitude. That life and our own muse, our own internal, our unconscious has got a lot in store for us. And I think the way a person has to sort of shake off that self-limiting self-conception of I'm only X, you know, and follow whatever the dream is, whatever brings joy, you know, however crazy it is. In fact, the crazier, the better, I think.
Yeah.
Because crazy just means unconventional, not thinking the way your mom and your dad thought, you know. So I do think I'm really glad to hear that you're expanding and doing other genres and stuff, because it's a way of finding out who you are, what's in this package, you know?
Absolutely, Steve. And I think that's a great place to leave it, because I just really, really agree with everything that you said there. It makes me sad and it hurts my heart when I see veterans limiting themselves in what they think they can do. You've said this yourself. When you come out, you have an MBA. You have an MBA in all these skills. The military. It's not about being taught how to fire a gun. It's about being taught how to put up with adversity. Was it you said the Marine Corps taught you to be miserable?
Yeah,
you know,
it's a great gift.
It is a great gift. That's a massive thing. I've got to be respectful of your time, Steve, because I could talk for hours. But thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate it. I've been looking forward to this conversation for 20 years. So
hey, thanks for having me, Jez. It's a real pleasure to meet you. Let's do it again. You know, I want to interview you, and I'll come back and we'll do it again.
Guys, thank you so much for listening today. Steve, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. That was a real privilege to have that conversation. Like I said, I've only been waiting for it 22 years. No big deal. Guys, thank you so much for all the support that you've been giving the podcast. It has been It's been a great last few months. The podcast is growing. You guys have been enjoying it. I really appreciate it when you get in touch. If you get in touch and let us know that you particularly enjoyed a guest or that they particularly helped you, I do my best to pass those messages on as well, because I know that they like to hear them. So thank you so much for those. VSOM Store, if you want t-shirts or any of that kind of thing, VSOM Store is up online. I'll put Steve's books in vsompodcast.com/books. I'll link everything up in there. So if you go down into the show notes now, you can just click through to these. Like I said, one of my favorite books of all time is The Afghan Campaign. I'm rereading the Alexander the Virtues of War book at the moment. That's brilliant as well. War of Art is something that everybody should have that in your house, regularly reading that one for the kick in the ass that we all need. Finally, before we leave today, guys, I just want to say thank you so much to the Royal British Legion for making this podcast possible. Check them out at Royal British Legion on social media or rbl.org.uk. There's so much that they do for veterans, including making this podcast happen. Just go on there, guys. See what they have going on. You never know when you might need it yourself or when a friend does. We'll talk more in depth about what they have going on soon, because they are going to be making a big push on events with, obviously, there's going to be some economic backlash after lockdown. And Royal British Legion, I'm doing a lot of work right now to make sure that they are going to be in the right position to help veterans and their families through any tough times that may be on the way. All right, guys, there we have it for today. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you again, Steve. And guys, I will catch you next time. Love you. Bye.
Yeah. Listen. Shout out Teaser. You told me not to worry, and you wouldn't break my heart. You told me you were sorry, yeah, my whole world fell apart. You said it's not my fault, and yeah, I've never done you wrong. I'm grinding to a halt, now I can see you're moving on. I promised I'd get better, and I told you things would change. You keep me to the gutter, yeah, I'll never be the same. I've gotta let you go, now live your life and spread your wings. And yeah, you put on quite a show, and pulled the puppet strings. And are you sure that you don't want me? Remember all the pain, or maybe you should thank me. It's your loss and my gain. I'm leaving now forever, I won't hang my head in shame. But yeah, you've taken me for granted, and you should feel ashamed. You sold a dream to all of us, a dream that we'd all die for, a reason for us all to live and something we could fight for. I might just help a man up to his feet or hold a newborn, but no matter what I do, my hands remembering my rifle, yeah.
Life's hard, I know that, still wouldn't change shit. I wouldn't go back, yeah, I wouldn't go back. Feelings I hold back, memories fade, yeah, they go fast, yeah, they go fast. Good times to come and go, survive the highs and lows, just take it step by step, I guess, yeah, I suppose. Good times to come and go, survive the highs and lows, just take it step by step, I guess, yeah, I suppose.